Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm deeply grateful to each of you for the opportunity to share my practice and to share what has been graciously shared with me. I am also grateful to Jacob and everybody at Embodied Philosophy for this opportunity. It's interesting that we are gathered here on Embodied Philosophy's online Buddhism conference because Embodied Philosophy tells the story perfectly of today's talk. We are here to talk about embodiment. So, astronomer Carl Sagan once said, if you want to bake an apple pie from scratch, well, you're going to have to start with the Big Bang. So we're going to start with the Big Bang today, as in, we're going to start with the Buddha's origin story. Very famous story, and some of you are very familiar with it, but I think that there are some aspects to his story that are sometimes underprivileged and that are very, very important. So we know that the Buddha, Siddhartha, was a prince in India and that he grew up cloistered in a palace, that he never ever left the palace because everything that he could possibly need was in that palace. And that one day he did leave with one of his attendants for the very first time. And at that time, he saw an old person for the first time and realized that everybody gets old. He saw a very, very sick person and came to understand that everybody gets sick. And he also saw somebody who was dead and on their way to the funeral pyre, to the charnel grounds, and realized that everybody must die. And he was so privileged and so situated within his royal life that this was profoundly disillusioning to him. He was completely thrown off, and he ended up leaving his palace in search of the truth about life. And so I'm reminded of a Peggy Lee song, actually, that says, "Is that all there is?" You know, meaning, is this all there is to life? And the song continues, "Is that all there is, my friends? And if that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball." Right? So the Buddha took a different tack. He said, if that's all there is, well, actually, I refuse to accept that. There must be more to this. There must be more to life than birth, old age, sickness, and death. And so he left the palace and he went in search of the truth. And he studied with many of the great masters of his time. And he learned their forms of spirituality. And the prevailing thought in Eastern spirituality at the time was that in order to go beyond the body, in order to get to the soul, to get to spirit, in order to free oneself of these ailments that have to do with the body, birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? In order to do that, you had to mortify the body. You had to find a way to shun the body, to shut it out, right? So he learned forms of meditation that were practiced sitting on beds of nails, or would go into yogic trances and stare at the sun from dawn until dusk and somehow not burning his retina out, right? He says that he fasted so much that he got so emaciated that if you touched his belly, you would touch the front of his backbone, right? So he was mortifying his body in order to go beyond his body. And the Buddha says that he attained very, very high states of meditation. In fact, he mastered all of his teacher's practices. But the problem was he kept coming down. He kept coming down from his high state of realization. When he stopped practicing, the state of realization faded. And the Buddha said, no, I want the peace that lasts. I want the state of attainment that does not budge when I'm done sitting on the cushion or sitting on the bed of nails or whatever, right? So the Buddha became disillusioned a second time. And he left this mode of practice, and he left this life, and he left his spiritual communities, and he wandered some more by himself. And there was an important moment that came his way, in that, as I already mentioned, he was very, very emaciated. And he came across a woman who was, I believe, doing her laundry in a river. And she saw how emaciated that the Buddha was, and offered him a bowl of rice and milk. And he took it. He nourished his body. So this gave him the energy to eventually, and very famously, go and sit at the Bodhi tree, where he resolved not to move until he woke up completely, until he became radically present. So let's pause and reflect here. How does this relate to our own lives? Can we place ourselves in the Buddha's struggle, becoming disillusioned with the world, rebelling against the notion that this is all there is, trying thing after thing after thing to be happy and to not suffer, right? Going to the therapy appointments, to the yoga classes, drinking the green juices, trying a new relationship, etc., etc., etc. And we're always somehow convinced that maybe the next self-help book that I buy will have the answer. Maybe the next online conference that I attend will have the missing link to my happiness, right? So we try everything, and yet we are still left in the state that we originally found ourselves in. Disillusion, wanting more, wanting to be happy, not wanting to be confused, not wanting to be a mystery to ourselves. And we also engage in our own forms of mortification, don't we? Hating our discrepancies, disavowing painful experiences that we've had, negating hurt, repressing hurt, and the lonely parts of ourselves, constantly wishing things were some other way. As William James said, this ceaseless frenzy of always thinking I should be doing something else. Right? We struggle against the sorrows and difficulties that life naturally presents to us. We engage in endless negative self-talk, wishing that someone, a savior, a lover, could come along and save us from ourselves. This is called arguing with reality. And anytime we enter into an argument with reality, an argument with the way things naturally are, we're the loser. How can it be any other way? So the Buddha sat at the Bodhi tree with this firm resolve not to move until he woke up. And what happened next in the mythological telling of this story is that a demon god named Mara, the embodiment of delusion, manifested before him to try to throw him off his seat. And there was 3 trials that Mara presented to him. The first trial was lust. Mara brought forth his 3 daughters, who were interestingly named Desire, Fulfillment, and Regret. And he offered them to the Buddha as a way to attempt to get the Buddha to leave his meditation, to abandon his journey. And this did not faze the Buddha. The second trial was one of fear. Mara manifested an army of demons who shot arrows at the Buddha, but the Buddha's state of realization, his state of loving kindness, was already so strong that it was like a force field around him that turned the arrows to flowers. And then the third and most important trial was he hit the Buddha in a place that I think is very germane to us all, something that each of us holds and that we spend most of our lives running from, and is one of the most important things we could possibly address in our spiritual practice. He hit the Buddha in the place of unworthiness, in his sense of not good enough, or perhaps not lovable, not deserving of good things. He said to the Buddha, "Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are going on this journey to wake up? You don't deserve to be free. You don't deserve to know the truth. You don't deserve to see the light." This was Mara's last-ditch effort. This represents him pulling out all the stops, because that sense of unworthiness runs so deep for so many of us. It's so triggering that it throws me off of my seat all the time. And I know that the same is true for almost everybody. And the Buddha's response to this cannot be underlined enough. What the Buddha did next is so profound, and that is he touched one hand to the earth. He touched the earth, and he said, with the earth as my witness, I have a right to this awakening. And then, the skies opened up and flowers showered from the heavens and the earth rumbled and, whatever. He skipped off into the sunset underneath a rainbow, right? However these stories tend to end. But with that, he awoke fully, right? Very simple and easy to underestimate moment of touching the earth in the most desperate moment of his journey. So I think it's fairly obvious, and I've already pointed out the ways in which we can identify with this aspect, that each of us holds traumas of varying degrees. Traumas with a capital T, traumas with a lowercase t, right? Senses of unworthiness, deserving bad things. Right? I work as a psychotherapist, and so often I work with victims of assault and abuse and neglect, who often believe that what's happened to them was their fault because they are unworthy at their core. And I'm here today to share with you that we can take the earth as our ally. If we think about the earth for a moment, she is the greatest artist that ever was, right? No one can create like the earth. She is self-healing, massively self-healing. Like when you see grass bursting up through asphalt, through the sidewalk, that is the power of the earth, that even our concrete man-made jungle cannot stop her from growing. So the earth is a powerful ally, right? So, and this was the Buddha's journey, one of connecting to his body and connecting to the earth. He stopped negating his body. He nourished himself. He placed his body in a meditation posture with his back against a tree. And in the most challenging moment, he relied on the earth. And what the Buddha discovered, what he woke up to, wasn't Buddhism, by the way, wasn't what we call Dharma, right? He discovered something much more fundamental. I think this is an important point, is that he discovered something that anybody could discover if only they knew how to look. And that's what Buddhism is it's one method of looking. Because life itself, our bodies, our world, our hearts, they have a path to reveal to us that may just be independent of all of our concepts of who we think we are, who we ought to be, and what we ought to be doing. There's a natural unfolding here. And the path to awakening is incredibly individual, incredibly subjective. And what I would like to do is talk about what that has to do with embodiment. So this talk promised some discourse on neuroscience, right? And really we're already talking about neuroscience because we're approaching talking about the body. And what is neuroscience other than a fancy word for saying the body, right? So generally speaking, and kind of clumsily speaking really, we have two sides of our brain, two hemispheres of the brain. The left side of our brain is the linguistic and rational, so-called rational side of the brain, right? It is the observing brain. In psychoanalysis, they call this the observing ego. It's the part of ourselves that is constantly analyzing and offering commentary and descriptions of what we're directly experiencing. It's the part of us that plans and makes strategies, right? And tries to figure things out. It's the part of our mind that shows up in words, in a narrative, in an inner dialogue, right? So this is the part of our brain that we tend to meet first in meditation. The first thing when we sit down to meditate that we tend to notice is that, oh, I'm thinking a lot. But then we have this other side of our brain, the right side of the brain. And this is correlates with the psychoanalytic concept of the experiencing ego. This is the part of our brain that is viscerally in touch with the direct experience of life. Right? We have neurons and neurotransmitters spread throughout our body, in our throat, in our heart, in our digestive organs, right? Which is why we talk about having a gut feeling about things. In fact, we have more neurons and neurotransmitters in our digestive tract than we do anywhere else in the body except for the brain, of course. So the brain is spread out throughout the body, right? And the body is directly experiencing the present moment all the time. It is through our senses that we find the present moment and that we engage viscerally and vibrantly with life. So when we journey into the body with meditation, we find quietude and presence. Right? We find the part of ourselves that is already pristinely awake.